Hi guys, and welcome back to another true crime and makeup time video. If you're new here, my name is Zara and I post a new true crime video every single week. What's this? So if you love makeup and you love true crime, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn the notifications on, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. So today's case was requested by Mel Annie, so thank you so much. And I think you actually requested this case like back on one of my old cases, like the Joseph Fritzl one, I think. So this case, unfortunately, is another abduction case, but I would say it has a happy ending if that's any consolation. When she was just 10 years old, Natasha Kampusch was snatched from the streets by a man named Wolfgang. A 10-year-old Natasha Kampusch never gave up on the idea that one day she would be free again. As hard as it can be to listen to and hear about, I think that it's a pretty inspiring one. Let's get into today's case. So you guys, I'm trying to like film a bunch of videos for you guys because when I have this baby, I'm gonna be MIA because newborns are so difficult. So I have my coffee. It's nice and early in the morning. And let's get into today's case. So Natasha was raised by her mother, Brittany Cerny, and her father, Ludwig Koch, in Vienna, Austria. And Natasha grew up with her two adult sisters and 5 nieces and nephews. Her mother and father separated while Natasha was still a child, and then they divorced later on. So Natasha spent time with both of her parents, but at the time this event took place, she had recently returned from a holiday to Hungary with her father, and she was going to go back to living with her mother. At the time, she was a student at the Briocheweg school in Vienna, so please forgive me if I butcher these names. Just correct me in the comments. I love to learn. So Natasha didn't grow up like rich or anything. She actually was born in the public housing areas of Vienna, and she was used to dealing with like disturbed people. There were a lot of alcoholics and mentally disturbed people in her sort of building, and they used to talk about conspiracy theories, and in her eyes, she believes they failed at life. Natasha stated that although her parents were divorced and you would think that they would sort of, fight for her attention or something like that, they would often, both of them, her mother and her father, would often slap and insult her. By the age of 10, she claimed she was a compulsive eater, depressed, and lonely. So that's pretty young to be like depressed and lonely. I mean, it's not that young because depression can happen to anyone, but it's just sad that it happened to her at such a young age. And even at that age, she dreamed of having her own job and starting her own life. On the morning of 2nd March 1998, Natasha leaves her home and she begins her short 5-minute walk to her school. And this actually wasn't a usual occurrence. This was the first day ever that Natasha was actually allowed to walk to school on her own. Because she was only 10 years old, her mother had never ever let her, walk to school alone prior to this. And when I think back to my parents, I mean, with immigrant parents, like they just literally have big balls because I'm pretty sure. So I think I would catch like the public bus when I was like 8 or 9. And when I think about that, like I lived in a foreign country. And when I think about that, I'm like, I would never let my kid do that ever, not at 8, not at 12 even. So I understand why Natasha's mother, never let her walk to school alone, even though it was 5 minutes. Like that's very, very short, but still 10 years old, you need, to be accompanied. So this was the first day that she was ever allowed to go and like start this walk on her own, and perhaps she was going to start walking to school every day by herself from now on. Today was finally the day, and Natasha leaves. She begins her walk, and as she's walking, she begins daydreaming about throwing herself in front of like a passing car. Little did she know that her last moments of freedom were going to be spent fantasizing about committing suicide. She claims that she would throw herself in front of a car and then her mother and father, would be sorry for the way that they treated her. Her parents' divorce had clearly taken a toll on Natasha. She really believed that life couldn't get any worse, which is so sad because then a man in a white van pulled up right next to her. So later that day, when Natasha should have been home, Natasha's mother, Brittany, she calls the school because Natasha hadn't returned home. And again, the school was only 5 minutes away. So this must have been close to when the school would have been finishing up for the day. And she calls the school and she goes, okay, like Natasha hasn't come home. Where is she? And they tell her, well, she didn't attend the school at all today. She didn't show up for any of her scheduled classes. At that point, Natasha's mom, Brigida, she was like, I have to call the police. And oh my God, I've been calling her Brittany. Her name is Brigida, not Brittany. So she calls the police and she reports her daughter, 10-year-old Natasha, as missing because she hadn't returned home from school. She told the police that that day her daughter, began her walk to school for the very first time, and it was a 5-minute walk and she still hadn't returned home. Surprisingly, the police started searching for Natasha immediately, which is kind of unheard of in other countries because you always hear about like, oh, maybe she's just gone here. Maybe she's like, no, over here they started the search immediately. So first police checked the school route, like how long the walk should have taken, and like check along the way. After that, they started searching the nearest ponds, and they even used police dogs, but they couldn't get like a scent of her or a trace of her at all. Immediately within that day, the police were like, okay, we think she's been kidnapped. So then they started asking around the area if anyone had seen anything. A 12-year-old student then contacts the police and says, I saw a girl that matches her description being kidnapped and forced into a van. Now, first of all, hello, if you saw that earlier in the freaking morning, why didn't you call the police and report that in the first place? But either way, she helped the police. So she tells them about this white van, and the police go and they start searching for every van with that description. They found 776 white vans in the area matching that description. They also started looking in Hungary, where she had just returned from, because this is what I find weird. She apparently had all her papers on her, like her passport and stuff like that, which, when you're 10, your parents like take everything. So why did she have her passport and things like that with her? And why did she take it to school? But apparently that's what she had. So because she had all that paperwork and passports with her, the police thought that maybe she could have even crossed the border. So they were looking in all the surrounding areas. And I think that's good. They were doing their job. They were really, really looking for her. Around the same time, the police who were looking into the vans noticed that a man named Wolfgang Priklopol had the same white van that matched the description, and he was a former technician. So he had the same van that the missing Natasha, had allegedly been kidnapped in. And when the police approached him and asked him, well, why do you need this white van? Like, what do you need it for? And Wolfgang responded that he needed this car to transport building material for his job. So that is the reason why he had a white van. So the detectives then asked, the standard questions, and they realized that Wolfgang didn't actually have like a solid alibi. He claims that on March 2nd, he was alone at home. So he didn't really have anyone to back his claims up. So now, like I said, they had 776 white vans to look at. So because they had that many cars to look at, they sort of just like let Wolfgang slip under the radar because he didn't seem suspicious to them, and they were just still investigating all these other cars. They didn't think that this 35-year-old, like mild-mannered, honestly wimpy looking guy seemed dangerous. Soon enough, everyone forgot about Wolfgang and the idea that maybe he was one of the men that was hiding a 10-year-old Natasha Kampusch. The scary thing when I was researching this case is that in the 1990s, a horrifying amount of young Austrian girls was snatched from the streets, like a large amount, like it was a common occurrence. And like one of these statistics, Natasha was one of them, one of these girls who was snatched right off the street. And for the next 3,000 days, Natasha was held captive by this man, Wolfgang, and was made to do whatever he pleased. Wolfgang was born on 14th May 1962, and he was an Austrian communications technician, but he was of Czech origin. He was born to his mom and dad, Karl and Waltraud Priklopol, in Vienna, and he was an only child. His father was a cognac salesman, and his mother was a shoe saleswoman. And prior to the kidnapping, he worked at Siemens as a communications technician. I hate that company name Siemens. Like I've always hated it. Like Siemens. What's crazy is that 5 minutes is all it took for Natasha to get to school. And in those 5 minutes, who knows, in the first 1 minute, in the first 2 minutes, like when did Wolfgang snatch her? But he managed to do so. I mean, if you think about it, a school, you know, is pretty big, right? Like a school campus ground is pretty big, usually. And if he snatched her from right outside or right close to that area, like no one saw anything apart from that 12-year-old student. Like it's crazy. No parents. So the good thing about Natasha is that as soon as she was snatched, her survival instincts immediately kicked in. She was only 10 and she started asking her kidnapper a bunch of questions. What size shoe do you wear? How old are you? Do you have any children? Are you married? Why don't you have any children? Like she was just asking all these questions. She had previously seen on TV that if, you know, this ever happened to you, you need to get as much information from your kidnapper as possible. And I'm telling you, if this happened to me at that age, like I would be exactly like that. I would just ask like a bunch of questions because I think you just have a little bit less fear at that age because you don't really know the full extent of what's going on. If it happened to me now, I feel like I would just be crying in the corner like, oh my God, why is this happening to me? I would just be like freaking out. Natasha knew that once she had that kind of information, she could help the police find whoever did this to her, but she wasn't going to get that chance, at least not for the next 8 years. So Wolfgang takes Natasha in his white van to the quiet town of Strasshof, which was 15 miles north of Vienna. And now it seemed that Wolfgang didn't just see Natasha and like just kidnap her on a whim. He had planned for this occasion very, very carefully because he had installed in his home a tiny soundproof room with no windows beneath his garage right inside his home. The secret room was so like fortified that it took 1 hour to even get inside this room. And I wonder like how much of that is true. I'm sure there's some truth to it, but how does it take an hour to get inside a room that is beneath your home? You know what I mean? Like what was it, like a bunch of locks? Like I wish they gave a little bit more information about that, but it just looks like his garage floor and then there was like a trap door and then that's how you went down into the secret room. So I wonder if it was just like really deep down or like had multiple doors and you had to like crawl spaces. I feel like that's probably what it was and that's why it took so long. So I actually found a little bit more information as to why it took so long to get down into this house. So it's into this room. So it says it was beneath a trapdoor in the garage, down some stairs, through a hollowed out concrete wall, hidden on the other side of a small metal hatch, concealed behind a cupboard. That's why. It was just 5 by 5 meters, so pretty small, bare, soundproof, and it constantly had the rattle of like a ventilator fan because, hello, you need to breathe. So when he takes her into this room, he makes her take away her school bag. And when she says like, oh, can I just, you know, hold on to my school bag like it's my bag? He was like, well, no, you could have hidden a transmitter in there. What 10-year-old is going to hide a transmitter in her school bag? But I mean, he had just kidnapped a girl, so it's understandable that he is so paranoid. Natasha says that when he asked her that, she was so used to adults doing and saying such strange things that she just didn't think anything of it. Natasha then states that she remembers regressing mentally in order to survive. On her first night in captivity, so the first time she goes to bed in this freaking place, she asks Wolfgang to tuck her into bed and please kiss her goodnight. All of which he happily did, of course. And she did this, she says, to, in her mind, to preserve a sense of normality. Like, okay, I'm just going to bed, guys. Like, nothing happening here. You know what I mean? Like, that I find that pretty intelligent for a 10-year-old to even do. It sounds weird, but it kind of is pretty intelligent for you to even make the distinction to make your mind like kind of calm. Like, otherwise you'd be freaking out, right? She would even ask him to read her bedtime stories and bring her snacks and things like that. So that was her way of staying normal. So in the beginning, their relationship was fairly uncomplicated. Like, I mean, that sounds so like basic, but in the sense of like what it turns into, I mean, as uncomplicated as it can get when one of you is trapped beneath a secret door in a dungeon and the other one has to like preserve this illusion of being a normal person and not a freaking creep. And the crazy thing is Wolfgang had to keep this secret pretty goddamn secret because he was often visited by his mother and his best friend Ernst. He would buy Natasha like fancy presents like train sets and croissants and things like that. He would be pretty like good to her in a way. But then I guess as he got used to her, his gifts began to become less and less thoughtful. Like one time he gave her like mouthwash and scotch tape as a present. And Natasha says that even though it was weird, considering like he used to give her train sets and stuff like that, she was still super happy to receive these presents because, you know, anything to feel kind of normal again, you know, and to have some sort of something to look forward to. She knew that what was happening to her was odd and it was wrong. But in somehow in her mind, she was able to just rationalize it. She says that when he would bathe her, right? Like she would like take her mind out of it and she would just pretend she was at a spa, you know, getting a treatment. When he would give her, you know, something to eat, she would just imagine like he's this gentleman like feeding her and being like really sweet to her. And she almost thought of him as serving her. And she felt very humiliated to even be in the position that she was in. For the first 6 months of her captivity, Natasha did not leave that like 5 by 5 meters, you know, room at all for 6 months. And then as, you know, things progressed a few years later, she was allowed to leave the room, but she was never allowed to leave the room at night. So she always, for the first few years, she always had to like come back to that room at night. So as she was there for a longer period of time, she was allowed to spend more and more time upstairs, but every time he went to work or every time, you know, it was nighttime and they had to go to sleep, she had to go back to, you know, her chambers at nighttime. So now Wolfgang seems like pretty harmless, right? But not everything he did was harmless. He insisted that he was this Egyptian god. And, you know, Natasha, again, I think she's really smart. She was just like, whatever, like no point in arguing, just go along with it. So she went along with, you know, his theories and everything of him being this Egyptian god. He would demand that Natasha call him maestro and my lord. But as Natasha turned into a teenager, she started to get pretty pissed off by his behavior and the fact that he was so psychotic and delusional. She started to rebel like any teenager would and would refuse to do everything he wanted or everything he wanted her to say. So for example, she refused to call him maestro, you know, or my lord. And she said that she thought it was stupid and it was silly. And she remembers from like her school days where, you know, people like the kids would be like, I am the king or I'm the princess and I'm in this castle. And, you know, the kids would be like, you have to listen to me, you know, because I'm the king. You have to do as I say. And she's like, she felt it was like a similar type of situation she was in. And she was like, I am not calling you that anymore. Like she felt it was ridiculous. And so now Pricklepole was like, oh, well, you're not going to listen to me and obey me. So now, you know, his little captor wasn't like, you know, a docile plaything. She was now starting to fight back. So he was like, all right. So he, you know, arced up too. But obviously he had the power. So his solution was to break her completely and then remold her. Like that was what he believed he was going to do. So he began to beat her up to 200 times a week, denied her food, forced her to clean the house, you know, half naked. And he would keep her in that room and he would turn off all the lights. So she was super isolated in complete darkness. He would then continue to do this for long periods of time, like deny her food, keep her in the dark room, you know, beat her for long stretches rather than just because she disobeyed him like the one time or something. He then like built an intercom where he could yell at her from his upstairs bedroom while she was downstairs at night, and he would just yell all night into the intercom like just obscene things at her. And you know, he was trained as an engineer at Siemens, and that's how he was able to like build this intercom by himself. He started bringing her upstairs now, this time to clean, and she had to do so naked, but she could only like look down. She couldn't look at him. And she was only allowed to speak when she was spoken to, or he would beat her. I think basically because she rebelled, he just wanted to show her who was boss. Like he was like, you are not in control in this situation, it's me. And he wanted her to submit and he wanted her to obey him without questioning anything. And clearly this guy clearly had no girlfriend, no nothing, no life. Like he was a complete loser. And that's why these freaking men do shit like this. Because who wants to be told you're the king? Like, okay, because if you know you're a G, you're a G. You don't need nobody to tell you. You know what I'm saying? She claims that when they ate together, he would always like give himself like the bigger portion and like he wanted to show her that she had no rights and that she was only there for like manual labor. Natasha has also largely refused to talk about her sexual assault that took place. She does, however, I guess, state that the abuse that she did endure was very minor. She's saying that when he first captured her, that he would tie her to his bed, but then she insists that all he would ever do was cuddle her. And I think that, I don't know, I don't need to hear about the sexual abuse. You know what I mean? Like, that's something that she went through. That's something that's personal to her. And I don't know, like, sharing it would help, the people who have been through it, it would help them sort of not feel so alone. But for regular people like you and me, like, what does it do? Sometimes I feel like sharing this kind of stuff just makes the sickos, satisfied, and they enjoy hearing about it. So I feel like it was a good thing that she kind of kept that part to herself in a way. And hopefully she, was healing from it, because no matter how minor the sexual abuse is, it's still sexual abuse, She says that she felt that he had two parts to his personality. One was dark and brutal, and due to this, she had various suicide attempts over the years, which is crazy to think about, committing suicide at such a young age. And I mean, it's different because she was, being held captive. But even when she was 10, she was saying she wanted to jump in front of the car to punish her parents and stuff like that. So I feel really sorry for her that she already had that kind of mindset, and then this happens to her. I feel like she also had a pretty mature sense of self, like a 10 to be able to think like that, and to be able to, want to ask questions from your captor and things like that. It's pretty mature and intelligent, I feel. Remarkably though, this determination that she did have since she was 10, she never lost it. She never lost the will to survive, which is funny because even though she attempted suicide, I think what she meant by that is, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die at my hands. I'm not going to die at his hands, So a couple years into her captivity, when she turned 12, she had a vision of meeting her 18-year-old self. And she tells herself, I will get you out of here. I promise you. She said to herself, right now you are too small, but when you turn 18, I will overpower, your kidnapper, and I will set you free. Now, since she was 12, the beatings continued for the next 6 years, which blows my mind because these freaking captors, don't they get sick of it? Who wants to beat, who wants to beat someone every single day? For real. It's just what a loser. You know what I mean? And they must have some really, it's pretty obvious they have issues, but these people who can do this to other people, I just wonder what happened, because we don't really know what happened to Wolfgang in his childhood. It doesn't really say. It seems like an ordinary childhood. So clearly he's just destroyed from the start. So because he would beat her, for so long, the only way that she could sometimes escape the beatings was to beat herself. So she would beat herself, mockingly, punch herself in the face over and over and over again until he would he would beg her to stop. When she was 14, she tried to slit her wrists with a knitting needle, but then she states that there were also moments of warmth where he would, attempt to apologize to her, buy her gifts, say sorry. And then he would tell her about his dreams of their life together. Okay. So as the years stretched on, Wolfgang just became more and more and more, comfortable with Natasha. He had her for nearly a decade at that point. So as he grew more and more comfortable with her, he would even have breakfast with her each morning. So they would both sit down, and have breakfast together like a couple every morning. And he liked being listened to. He liked someone there to listen to all his issues, He did force Natasha to bleach her hair blonde, and she had to clean his house, but she would be there to listen to his conspiracy theories. And once he even took her skiing. His vision was for her to be this beautiful Aryan servant for him, just for him. And he tells her that the Jews were responsible for 9/11. He gave her books so she was able to, remain educated. And she doesn't feel like she missed anything during her time, held in captivity by him, because she says she like stayed away from smoking, drinking, doing drugs, like all those things that she may have done, she stayed away from. But she states that obviously it was a place of misery for her to be in. She was given a TV and radio to pass time, but she was only allowed to like listen to pre-taped programs, because he didn't want her to hear about like herself on the news or anything like that if, you know, a news report ever came up. At one point, she did try to escape by jumping out of a car, but he convinced her that if she does like ever attempt anything like that again, he was just going to kill her. He even warned her that the doors and windows of his home were booby-trapped with explosives, so if she ever tried to escape, it would mean death for like the both of them. He also always told her that he was carrying a gun at all times, and if she ever tried to escape, he was going to kill her, kill himself, and then kill the neighbors too. She says she thinks that he really trusted her. Like, he was able to communicate with Natasha and like sort of act out his illness. He just wanted to create his own little perfect world where everything was perfect inside it, and that was like the two of them. In fact, he actually took her on 13 day trips in total, to a chemist, to a hardware store, but mostly he took her to these like rental flats that remember his best friend Ernst was renovating, so he would always like take her there, and he made Natasha do the manual work for these rental flats. So gentlemen, she was too scared to say anything or to run away, you know, to say anything to the chemist or like anyone working at the hardware store. She was just too afraid. She even they even got stopped, like while they were driving in the car, they even got stopped by a policeman at this like roadblock, and she still was too afraid to say anything. Like, that's how much fear he instilled in her. But despite that, it doesn't mean she didn't stop looking for a chance to flee. She kept thinking about it, kept trying to plan it for years. She'd had some chances, you know, but she was just too scared each time to actually make the move. And now it was coming up to her 18th birthday. And she was like, I promised myself when I was 12 that when I was 18, I was going to run. And she was like, dang, I really have to like stick to that promise. So one day, even though she knew she was risking, you know, getting a beating, she confronts Wolfgang. She tells him, you have put us in the situation where only one of us can make it out alive. I am really grateful to you for not killing me and for taking such good care of me over the years. That is very nice of you, but you can't force me to stay with you. I am my own person with my own needs, and this situation that we're in, it needs to come to an end. She like closes her eyes, like expecting a beating, but he didn't do anything. And when she looked up, she sees his face. She can see that he's like sad and defeated. She feels that a part of him was sort of relieved that she finally said something, because 8 years, you know? She says that he may have thought or may have realized that she was at the end of her rope, like she had had enough. He had brought her to the brink where she had no energy left, but in a good way, like in a way that actually strengthened her, and he didn't know what to do to counter it. Like, what's he going to do, beat her again? So a few weeks later, on August 23rd, 2006, both of them, Wolfgang and Natasha, they're in his front yard, and he's making her wash his red BMW sports car. And as she's doing that, he gets a phone call. So she's using the vacuum and she's cleaning the sports car, right? It's a vacuum, it's making a loud noise. So he gets this phone call and he like leaves her alone to continue cleaning the car so he can take this phone call. And she was like, wait, what? You just like left me alone here? Because previously he had always like observed her and like watched her the entire time. But because the vacuum cleaner was in her hand, he had to like go back inside the house or step away. I'm guessing he went like inside the house so that he was able to take this call, because she was in the driveway like cleaning the car. So she sees her chance. She leaves the vacuum running, puts it down, and she like tiptoes to the gate. And she looks around and she realizes, oh my God, the gate's unlocked. Like, how lucky was she? She says in that moment she couldn't breathe. She felt so paralyzed. And then she was like, run. Then she started running frantically. She ran for like 200 meters, running through the street, neighbors' gardens, jumping fences. And as she was running, there were like people, like men, passers by, and she was like, help me, but nobody helped her. They just ignored her. And then she runs up and she goes to like the 71-year-old neighbor's garden, like it's a woman. And she sees that this neighbor is in the shed. So she goes and she like knocks on the window to the shed. And she said, I am Natasha Kampusch. And the woman was like, oh my God. So she like grabs the phone, she calls the police, and the police arrive so quickly at like 1:04 p.m. And I mean, can you imagine how she felt? The police soon take her, back home, and she is reunited with her mother. Before, she was reunited with her mother, she was taken to the police station, and they had to confirm that it actually was Natasha Kampusch, and she was identified with the scar that she had on her body, also by her passport, which was actually found in the room that she was being held captive in. Because remember, she actually had all her documents in that backpack with her from her trip with her father to Hungary. And for some reason, over those 8 years, like, Wolfgang never destroyed any of that, which is kind of stupid on his part. And then they also conducted DNA tests on her. Although she was found to be in good physical health, she was extremely pale from all her years spent inside the house. She weighed only 48 kilos, which is like 106 pounds. When she was 10, she weighed 45 kilos. So she gained like 3 kilos over the course of 8 years and turning into an adult. Her BMI was like 14.8 when a normal BMI, like a healthy BMI, is 18.5 to like 25, around there. And she grew only 15 centimeters. That's like 5.6 inches, that much. Like, that's wild. So obviously when Wolfgang finishes his call, he's like, well, Natasha's gone. And, poor guy, it had become a terrible burden for him. The stress of it all, the stress of keeping a secret slave. So he goes to his friend Ernst, and they get in the car and they drive around. And they actually drive around Vienna for 3 hours. And during this time, he is just confessing everything to him. He tells Ernst, I am a kidnapper and I am a rapist. And then somehow, I don't know if Ernst was in shock or what was going on, Ernst lets him out of the car, and Wolfgang walks over to some railway tracks that are nearby, and then he lays down on the tracks. And soon a train passes by and runs over Wolfgang, killing him. The train actually ran over his head, which is insane. Wild, insane. Later evidence, like gathering evidence, was difficult for the police because the computer that Wolfgang had was like really old. It was like from the 1980s, and it was like incompatible with like the modern day technology data recovery system. It was 2006, And before Natasha actually escaped, she's so lucky that she escaped right when she did, because it was found in his computer that he was trying to obtain false papers to be a Czech citizen, as he wanted to just begin a new life with her. I mean, if she hadn't escaped at the time she's in a whole foreign place, like, my gosh, it would have been so much harder. At first, Natasha says that when she was set free, she was offered like a bunch of help from strangers and stuff, but then they would say weird things like, you could come and, live at my house. You could, help me with the housework. And even though I'm married, I'm sure we can make an arrangement. I'm sure my wife will understand. Like, are you serious? What is wrong with people? From being a slave for 8 years, come to my house now and be a paid slave? Like, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with people? But she says that people stopped being kind to her and feeling sorry for her when she refused to play like the victim role, a weak girl, in need of help. And instead, when she tried to explain to reporters in the media like the ins and outs of hers and Wolfgang's relationship, like, they just didn't like it. That wasn't the story that people wanted to hear. They wanted to hear from a victim. They didn't want to hear from a survivor. So they just boiled it down to, oh, she's just, she's crazy. She's just suffering from Stockholm syndrome. And she believes that this label was put on her because they wanted to deny her from the ability to judge her own situation and her own experiences that she experienced. You know what I'm saying? Like, she says she finds it very natural that you would adapt yourself to identify with your kidnapper to survive, especially if you spend so much time with that person. It's about empathy. It's about communication. Looking for, normality within the framework of a crime it's not a syndrome. It's not Stockholm syndrome. It is just a way to survive. And survive she did for 8 years. How many of us could say we could do the same thing? She says that some people say she should be locked up again, this time in a mental institution, which is so twisted. And that, the situation that she went through wasn't so special, that she enjoyed being kidnapped by Wolfgang and being held captive for 8 years. People really, really have been saying that about her. Like, wow. So the crazy thing is, Natasha actually bought Wolfgang's home in Strasbourg, where she was held captive, because she wanted to prevent it from becoming some sort of shrine. But she actually spends a lot of time there because of the time that she spent during her formative years. Like she has memories from there. She says that she finds the fame that she has gotten like bothersome and disturbing. And she knew that when she was being held captive, that if she ever was to escape, her story would be, you know, become famous. But she thought it would be more like something more positive, you know, because she was a survivor, she escaped, like it would be something positive. She says, you're in the media once, people admire you, and then they forget about you. So the cellar that she was actually held in, that like wasn't a cellar, what do you call it, like the dungeon, she eventually just filled the whole thing with cement so as to prevent it from ever being used that way ever again. Since her escape, Natasha has actually written 3 successful books, despite the media, you know, wanting her to become something that she was not. The first book described her capture. The second book talked about her recovery. And the third book actually talks about bullying and everything that she's experienced since her escape. And it's something that she's been experiencing a lot, which is so sad. And I wonder why life goes like this for some people, because I mean, she was a survivor, and the media, or people, whatever you want to call it, there's people behind the media, right, are turning it into something else. But Natasha honestly is an incredible woman. Like I always think like these kids that these things happen to, like abductions and stuff, like they are incredible. It blows my mind the strength that they have. Mentally alone, she is stronger like than most people I know. Natasha stated that she has learned to ignore the hate directed towards her, and she only chooses to focus on the nice things in her life. It's amazing to know how she kept her composure through all those years and through all the brutality that she endured, like not even snapping. Like I think I would die if I was ever held captive solely purely because of my mouth. And I also really admire her for not discussing her sexual assaults. I don't know if she does in the book, in the first book, but imagine the pressure and the statements she would have been pressured to make by the media and the police, and yet she didn't falter in that. Sometimes people want to know, you know, for their own sick curiosity as opposed to actually wanting to help the victim. They want to know what happened, you know, little details throughout those 8 years that she was with Wolfgang. And in a way, even though some may feel that Wolfgang evaded justice, in a way it's probably better that he killed himself, because imagine if she had to go through a trial and had to see him in court and prove that she was, you know, being held captive and all the things he did to her. Like it would, like having to outline every single thing might have been even more torture in that sense. It's crazy that people or the media are judging her. Like, I wonder why that is. Is it purely because she's not your typical victim? She's not what they want her to be. She's not destroyed by this. It seems like from what I've read, people are just like over her story. They're overhearing about it. They're kind of like, yeah, you were abducted. We get it. Like kind of like that. And it's very different to like the abduction cases we hear about in the US, where these women are like praised and like, you know, talked about so highly for being survivors. And it's just not the same for her. And I feel sad for her that she's not being given the respect that she deserves for being so brave and so strong. So let me know your thoughts on today's case, guys. I would love to hear it down in the comments. And thank you so much for watching. And I will see you in my next video, guys. Besitos. Mwah. Bye.